Well, I am being quite outspoken about measurements because I think there is far too much emphasis placed on measurements these days on the customer and reviewer side.
Welcome to StereoNET. We're here at the StereoNET Hi-Fi and AV show in Melbourne, and I'm fortunate to be joined here in the studio with Peter Comeau, the Director of Acoustic Design at IAG, the company that owns Wharfedale, Mission, Castle, Audiolab and Quad. Welcome, Peter. It's a pleasure to see you here in Australia.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Firstly, can you tell us a little bit about your history and how you came into the position that you are presently at IAG?
Well, I've spent, 45, 50 years in hi-fi in one way or another, starting off working in retail in London, then managing a shop down in my hometown in Plymouth in Devon, southwest of England. And it was there that I met somebody who said, I need a pair of speakers to improve upon the ones I've got, but I have a very limited budget. And we quickly realized that there actually wasn't anything I could sell him. So it was, well, there's obviously a gap in the market here. So we designed a speaker. It took me a long time because I had to rediscover, really. I thought I knew something about loudspeakers, but it turned out I didn't. And it took 18 months to design this pair of speakers, but we launched it as a Haybrook HP2. I then ran Haybrook for 15 years. Did a bit of journalism as well, so reviewing for hi-fi magazines, and then joined Mission in 1999. Designed some award-winning products for them, and then ended up as Director of Acoustic Design for IAG.
Wharfedale's a very broad product suite, for example, from 2-channel to AV to wireless.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific input and oversight into each of the product lines? And how do you seek a sonic consistency across those product lines and models?
Yes, I have a hand in every single loudspeaker that we produce. In terms of consistency, I'm basically using these. I mean, Gilbert Briggs, when he started Wharfedale in 1932, he had no background in audio whatsoever. But he was an accomplished pianist, and he had a feel for sound, I suppose you could say. Mm-hmm. So developed everything by ear. And simple as it might seem, actually it's a really good way of doing things. So if you're developing by ear, then any product range yes, I mean, to a certain extent, every loudspeaker has its own character based upon the physics. You have to get the physics right first. But when we're doing a range, we do the Diamond range, obviously, the Evo range. We're dealing with speakers which have very similar physical attributes. Mm-hmm. So it's fairly easy for me to design a consistent performance across that range. And in fact, it's an absolute must, because if you're going to do, it's okay to do a stereo pair of speakers, but if you're then going to say, we want to do an AV setup as well, then the center channel and the surrounds, the bookshelves, which people often use for surrounds, they all have to match the floor standards as well. So everything has to be tonally matched, and I do that simply by putting an AV system together and making sure that we can move between speakers and everything sounds correct.
So expanding on that, is there a consistency between IAG brands as far as voicing or design goes, or do they each have their own house sound?
No, I think every brand has its own house sound. The reason for that is actually customer expectation. So I was in retail, as I said. I was also a reviewer, so I came across these brands from my teenage years up, actually. I was well aware of most of the brands that we talk about. One you left off actually, which I must add, and that's Leak, not
yes.
to be forgotten. So I'm lucky. I've got a very good audio memory, and when I joined IAG, my first question before joining was, please will you allow me to keep the brand distinction intact? Because a Wharfedale customer has a feeling for, let's say, a sort of warm, inviting sound, something which draws you into the music. Contrast with that, a Mission customer is, I learnt when I went to Mission, I quickly learnt the characteristic that they required. Something a little bit more forward, a little bit more explicit in the way that it pushes detail at you and so on. Every brand needs handling in that way in order to meet customer expectations.
So Wharfedale's a hi-fi company that does reflect on its past. So you have the Heritage series, which is a throwback to a time and speaker aesthetics. How have you found technology's played a role in retaining the house sound but making improvements on older designs?
Well, we launched the Heritage series basically because we came to Wharfedale's 80th anniversary, and we thought it would be a really good idea to commemorate that with one of the most famous products from Wharfedale's past, or certainly one of the best-selling products from Wharfedale's past. And I mean, when I was in retail, I sold a lot of Wharfedale Dentons, and we recreated that. But it is a dramatic speaker underneath because it has all the modern technology in it compared with what went into the original Denton. So it's really brought up to date. Yes, you might say, well, we're still making moving coil drivers, but when you look underneath, you know, when you really delve into what those drivers are doing, we can do stuff now that just wasn't available. And the way I put it is that there's a lot of people who are buying up old speakers now and replacing stuff in the crossovers or whatever, replacing capacitors which have worn out over the years, which is fair enough. And then they're going, oh, these sound fantastic. But they're not putting up against the modern equivalents, if you like. I mean, it doesn't have to be the Heritage series, but just a modern equivalent. They're basking in the rosy glow of the past to a certain extent. But if they were to put them up against the modern equivalents, and of course you can do that with our Heritage series, you know, you can take an original Linton, put it up against our new Linton, and now do the same with a Dovedale. And what you'll find is, first of all, the amazing reality. You've moved from something which is making nice music into something where you've still got something which is making nice music. But the reality of having performers in the room with you, of having singers between the speakers, instruments around the speakers, that's come on in leaps and bounds. And I find that clarity, that realism, to be extremely important in the enjoyment of the music that I'm playing.
So that's an interesting segue. Where do you think the greatest advancements have occurred as a loudspeaker designer? You know, is it the material science? Is it acoustic electrical modelling, or is it measurement techniques? And how has that either simplified or made it more complex for you as a designer?
Well, I am being quite outspoken about measurements because I think there is far too much emphasis placed on measurements these days on the customer and reviewer side. And I'm sorry to say it, I know StereoNET doesn't do this, thankfully. You don't. You do more by listening. But there are some reviewers on social media, and there's a lot of comment on forums about measurements. Measurements are a really good tool for the designer. They're not a really good tool for the analyst. So I use measurements. I mainly use measurements actually to find out what's going wrong. So when I'm listening to something, I can hear something wrong, I'll use measurements to analyze it and correct it. But it's not a good tool when you're trying to make a speaker that plays music, because measurements are all based on steady tones. Music is anything other than steady tones. In terms of materials, I think material science has come a long way. We have found that when you're using woven materials like woven Kevlar, we use a lot in Wharfedale, woven glass fibre we've started to use in some of our flagship series and so on. Those have particular performance attributes over, say, the old days of paper. That's not to say that paper is a bad material. It's not a bad material. It's a very good material, and it's very malleable. You can put different fibres in with pulp paper and get different results, and that's great. But the materials that we have available now, and the variety of materials, means that that's the way to progress in terms of performance. The other thing is our understanding of magnet systems, motor systems in loudspeakers. Reducing distortion all the time is obviously something that we need to do. Not to incredible levels. I mean, again, I've been quite outspoken on this, that in terms of pure harmonic distortion, it's very difficult to hear below 1%. So there's no point in chasing anything lower than that. And in fact, that explains why you can take a loudspeaker which has harmonic distortion in the region of half or 1%, and it sounds fine. This idea that people have with amplifiers, say, where you should be chasing 0.0001%, it's nonsense. What you should be paying attention to are what are the non-musical distortions. And in speakers, that's mechanical. In amplifiers, it's caused by all sorts of electronic misbehavior, let's put it like that. And these things are things that we can analyze using measurement and correct. But to do it on a reviewer basis, I think that's a nonsense.
When we look at the Wharfedale range, there are similarities with cone and dome drivers. In the Elysian range, the upper frequencies are handled by ribbon drivers. Can you tell us why you've selected a ribbon, and what does that bring as a sonic signature?
Well, actually, it's not a ribbon.
Oh.
Yeah, it looks like a ribbon. It's actually an AMT, an air motion transformer. And I've actually been fascinated by the whole concept of the AMT ever since I learnt about it in the mid-70s. The AMT actually has a pleated diaphragm, and that instead of moving backwards and forwards like every other moving coil driver does, this actually squeezes the pleats and expands the pleats. Now, if you can imagine squeezing a lemon pit between your fingers, it doesn't take much energy to make it fly across the room at high speed. And that's what these pleats are doing. They're actually velocity devices. In fact, we call it an AMT now, but its original name was an AVT, an air velocity transformer, because it is creating velocity between the pleats, which then becomes a pressure wave as it comes out from the speaker. And that gives us a very, very fast transient response, something that follows the musical waveform very, very accurately with very low distortion. So we started that project with Elysian, developing an AMT which we thought worked really well and gave us an advantage over domes and other technologies. And we then bled that down into Evo, and now we'll be using it in the new Wharfedale Aura series.
So across your brands, loudspeakers are offered in all sizes and configurations. What are the challenges you face as the acoustic director in selecting the materials, the aesthetic, the box, the driver material for the range and the end customer?
Yeah, we are always, when we develop a new product range, we get everybody together. So we get the marketing team together, me and my technical guys, the ID designer, and we're all looking to make a product which serves the market. So we're basically trying to think as a customer, and we're looking out there and looking at what people are buying and the sort of thing that they want to buy, because obviously we could make something outlandish that nobody would, well, maybe a few people would want, but not enough people would want, right? I would rather get my loudspeakers into as many homes as possible, because I want people to enjoy the music through the systems that I'm developing. It gives me a good feeling to do that I'm making people happy. When I was in retail, I used to say to people, when you buy a really good hi-fi system, you won't watch television so much. So that's my goal, if you like, that's my target. But when we sit down with the team and say, right, what should this product range be? Who's it aimed at? How can we better serve the market? How can we better serve our customers with the products that we're making? And out of that, we'll formulate a specific type of product. And my input, of course, is always the acoustic side. I'll say, no, we can't do that, it's too small, I want something bigger. As you know, with the Heritage range, I've been pushing for bigger cabinets anyway, and thankfully the market has gone away from this ultra-thin fanaticism of fashion that we had 10 years ago, and people are now more accepting of what I call wide baffle speakers, because they can hear the benefits of that. There's a very good reason for the acoustics of benefit of that. So I'm always looking for the acoustic side, so I'm relating to the ID designer, you know, what I need acoustically, and he's molding that into something which he thinks look good, and then the marketing team are saying, well, maybe if you change that to that, and what effect does that have? And then I come back in and say, yes, we can do that, that's not a problem, or no, you really can't do that because it's going to muck up my aspect of performance. So it's a three-way aspect, if you like, and it's a challenge that I relish, because you know, out of that, when we do get it right, then we've got a product which people love.
And whether you're buying hi-fi for the first time or you're a seasoned audiophile on an upgrade journey, what is your view of the impact that a loudspeaker has on the overall reproduced sound?
Well, there are two aspects to that. One, of course, is the loudspeakers, the final element in the chain. So if you've got poor loudspeakers, you'll hear poor sound. There's absolutely no doubt about it. On the other hand, if you have, say, a loudspeaker which has got an impedance curve which is difficult to drive, I mean, I know of a lot of high-end loudspeakers out there that drop below 2 ohms at a certain point of their range. That's going to give an amplifier a hard time. So then the interface between the loudspeaker and the amplifier becomes incredibly important. Similarly, if you're talking about turntables, the interface between the cartridge and the phono stage and the amplifier is very important. So everything has to be thought of as a system. Now, when I'm designing loudspeakers, I do my best to make sure that the loudspeakers are not a difficult load, because I don't know what the customer is going to be using for an amplifier. And I don't want to dictate to the customer what he should be using in an amplifier. I want him to use what he feels comfortable with, but I want him to go into a retailer and listen to amplifiers and pick the one that he likes. So very much the same with loudspeakers. You shouldn't be limited by your amplifier with the loudspeakers that you want to choose. So that's one of the things that I aim for. But in terms of which is more important, I don't think there is. I think it's all important, and we should really be looking at what I call system synergy. You know, systems that work well together because these interfaces have been thought through.
So how important is it to match speaker to the music you listen to? So you think of scale, loudness, dynamics, even instrument type. So, and the room that you're then replaying it in.
Well, the room, there's an aspect of rooms which we call room gain as speaker designers. Below 400 hertz, your room is actually amplifying the low frequencies, and that's very useful, because if it wasn't for that, most speakers would have to go out of their way in order to generate humongous amounts of bass. So all loudspeaker designers use room gain to make their speakers sound natural. And you get more gain the smaller the room. So really, you don't want to put huge speakers in small rooms. And on the other hand, small speakers generally tend to be low sensitivity. So you don't really want to put small speakers in large rooms because they're not capable of generating the sound pressure level that you might need if you're sitting a long way away from the loudspeakers or trying to fill the room with sound. But the old what music is best suited to your loudspeakers thing always makes me laugh, because, you know, I listen to all genres of music. When I'm testing and doing fine-tuning on loudspeakers, I'm listening from everything: classical, jazz, rock, folk, electronic, even heavy metal. And loudspeakers have to work with everything. If they don't, then there's something wrong. A loudspeaker is not a heavy metal loudspeaker, or it's not an electronic music loudspeaker, or it's not a classical or a jazz loudspeaker. It is a loudspeaker. It is, if it's doing its job properly, it should be completely balanced in such a way that it doesn't matter what music you play. It may be that if you're into hard and heavy rock and you don't play anything else at all, you might choose something which has a ridiculous amount of slam and attack, that if somebody who liked classical music or jazz played their music on it, it would sound grating and ear-piercing. But that, I think, is a distortion, really, of what's going on. I prefer to make loudspeakers which are completely transparent and let you hear what the performers are doing in a very natural and accurate way.
Some of your speakers offer specific stands for each model. How important is that to the final sound? And is the stand, whether it's mechanical coupling and the height, how do you determine that? And what's the process you go through?
Yeah, this was quite fun for me and my co-partner at Haybrook, because when we designed the HB2, we thought, well, these look really nice on those single pillar stands, a single upright tube. And then we did a bigger speaker, the HB3, which needed a stand to raise it up off the floor, not a very high stand. And we put casters on that because that's what everybody else was doing, so that the housewife could move the speakers out the way when they were doing the hoovering. Sorry to be sexist, but we're talking about mid-70s here. And we couldn't, when we were listening, we couldn't really sort of understand why we weren't getting the dynamic performance that we expected to. And then I had to think about it, and I thought, well, even though the speaker, so the HB3 on its casters, is maybe rocking them back even a minuscule amount, how much does that matter? And I looked at what was going on in terms of how speakers work physically, and realized that, yes, at bass frequencies the cone is moving a lot, but also the mid-range unit is only moving a tiny amount. And if that movement of the bass cone is putting a vibration into the speaker which is making the whole thing on its casters rock backwards and forwards, even a fraction of a millimetre, that's going to interfere with what you hear about out of the mid-range unit. It's going to actually blur detail and lose dynamics. So we took the casters off, and because my partner had a thick carpet on the floor, we put some spikes on instead, just to go through the carpet and hold it still. And we were astonished. So then we did the same with the HB2s. We took away the single pillar stands and we designed something which had basically 4 legs, slightly splayed fleet to give us stability, and we put that on spikes as well. And that was equally as dramatic in terms of performance. And that stand we called the HBS1. We gave it to reviewers. They all went gaga about it, said this is the best speaker stand ever, and then suddenly everybody else is using spikes and making proper speaker stands. I hope, not always, but I hope so. So it gives you, perhaps that gives you an idea of how important the stand is. We then did some research with Plymouth University, because there was a guy there who was into audio, and he wanted to do a research project with us. We were doing it mainly on cabinets and the physical aspects of cabinets, but he also included stands, because he said, the cabinet is one thing, but what you're putting on is another. And then we found out that what we'd been doing in terms of stands was also giving us good vibrational control of the speaker. And you can actually measure that. I mean, John Atkinson in Stereophile has measured that, that there is a positive effect by having a really good stand under your speakers. So now I like, whenever we do a speaker range, I like to do stands that go with it, that conceptually look good, but also acoustically work well.
With your intimate knowledge of all the loudspeakers offered in IAG's range, what model is your personal favourite and why?
What model's my personal favourite? The one I'm working on. I mean, I'm lucky. I'm really, really lucky. I design speakers to suit me, because if you're designing something which it involves music, you have to be able to discern whether the music is enjoyable or whether the music is boring. You know, I'm not designing something which has a sound. I'm designing something which plays music. So therefore, I'm always looking, how could I improve the emotional connection between what has been recorded and what is entering my brain from my ears? So really, you could say I'm designing for myself. Now, I'm extremely lucky in that hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people in the world buying my products that are really enjoying them. So they're obviously thinking like I do. There's probably lots of people who don't like the products that I make, but that's fine too, you know. So when I'm doing that, when I'm designing something which involves getting into the enjoyment of music, I'm taking speakers home, and I'm listening at home, and me and my wife and my family are, you know, getting pleasure out of those once they get to a point. My wife, by the way, is my sternest critic. She knows absolutely when something is exciting and enjoyable to listen to and when it's just making a horrible noise. So yeah, I mean, I suppose if you say out of the range that I do I have a favourite of speaker that I've designed recently, then yes, I think the Elysian 4 is quite a work of art. I spent 2.5 years during COVID designing the Mission 770, so that's very dear to my heart as well. But as an impoverished teenager, the first speakers that I built were from a Wharfedale kit that made up into the Dovedale. So it's been wonderful recreating the Dovedale to play at this show now, and you know, people are coming in and loving it.
And finally, what does your crystal ball reveal about what form and function loudspeakers will hold, say, in 50 years' time?
Well, I think we've got to look at what is happening in smart loudspeakers. Yes, in hi-fi, we're not there yet. When I say we're not there yet, there are two reasons for it. One is that I believe that streaming, Class D amplifiers, the way that we are learning to handle digital media is still in its infancy. The reason I think people say I like the sound of turntables still or better is perhaps because we haven't quite got there in terms of the way that we handle digital media yet. I like streaming. I like streaming, listening to streaming as much as I like listening to FM radio, as much as I like listening to vinyl. For me, they're just different sources. I don't have any preference between them. But I think it just goes to show that we're improving all the time in those aspects. The problem that we have as manufacturers, I'm talking about IAG here, is that, and I've seen it with other manufacturers as well, is that most of our customers, as I said earlier, have got favourite pieces of equipment that they love. So they'll have a favourite amplifier, they'll have a favourite turntable, ARM cartridge, some other source. And they don't want to give that up. So to ask them to buy an active loudspeaker where they have to give all of that up because you know, you've got all the electronics built in, is a bit much, and they're not responding to that at the moment. They're saying, no, I want to keep what I've got, I know what I've got, I like that freedom of choice of being able to choose my source, my amplifier and my loudspeakers, and that's the way I want to do it. So that's where they're putting their money at the moment. But we've seen, you know, we've done a couple of active speakers ourselves, and we've seen that if we can get the price down to manageable proportions, there's a new generation coming through. Young people who have grown up probably with smart speakers, have grown up with listening to really good quality headphones. And they are looking for something better not all of them, obviously, but
Yep.
a small percentage of them, and that's what the hi-fi market's always been, small percentage of them are looking for something better. So entry-level active speakers, especially if the streaming is done in a way that is easy to access and easy to operate, say off your phone, that's a growing market, and I think that will spread. And I think in 50 years' time, difficult to say what's going to happen, but I think if I'm going to sort of throw open a crystal ball, I think we'll have much better management of the physics of loudspeakers. So perhaps we'll be able to deliver higher performance from something smaller again, even though we're working against what I call the real physics of loudspeakers. Maybe we'll have conquered the ability to put speakers into walls and make them behave properly, or put them on walls and make them behave properly. But basically, I think these will all be speakers which have everything built in, so that you're talking about just buying a system. And that will enable you to play the music you want without any fuss whatsoever.
We're asking our guests to put forward one question to ask the audio equipment manufacturers in interviews ourselves. What one question would you like to ask the next guest?
I suppose I know what I usually talk to designers about is why they're doing things. But yeah, let's go back to that. You know, why have we got stuck in this era of frequency response and harmonic distortion, signal to noise, i.e. dynamic range? Neither of those things tells us anything about how music comes out of equipment. Why are we concentrating on just those specifications instead of looking at the real problems that exist in hi-fi?
On behalf of StereoNET, thank you very much for making a trip to Australia and to the StereoNET Hi-Fi and AV show. And of course, AV Revolution, your Australian distributor, and for their support and for your excellent insight into the IAG brands. Thank you very much, Peter. If listeners want to go to find out more about IAG Brands in Wharfedale, where should they go to?
Well, we have a website for every brand. So, wharfedale.co.uk, audiolab.co.uk, mission.co.uk, and so on is the easiest way to find information on products to start with. And obviously a good retailer is there to help you listen to our products. And I really sincerely hope you enjoy listening to music on them the way that I do.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.